Welcome to West Basin Municipal Water District Water Policy and Legislation Committee meeting. Mr. General Manager, do we have a quorum?
Madam Chair, I'll do roll call real quick. Director Don Deere.
Here.
Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston. Director Harold Williams.
Here.
Director Desi Alvarez. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Is there any person from the public wishing to speak?
Madam Chair, we do not have any requests submitted for public comment, though this meeting is being held both virtually and in person. If there are any members of the public that would like to make public comment at this time, please indicate so by raising your digital hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
All right, we go to the any presentation.
Madam Chair, we do not have any staff presentations today.
All right, number 5, action calendar.
Yes, Madam Chair, the first action item that we have for you today is item 5A. It is related to a resolution authorizing an application for grant funding to the United States Bureau of Reclamation. For this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst 2.
Thank you, EJ. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
actually, I'll
I've been
be-
working with Matt.
Okay,
I'll be.
my apologies.
Yeah.
This one. So, thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, Chairwoman Gray and directors. We're currently on page 3 of the agenda packet. So the first item before you today is a draft resolution that would authorize West Basin to submit an application to the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation for its fiscal year 2023 and 2024 Water Smart Planning and Project Design Grant Program. This is really just a procedural action that USBR requires as part of the application and selection process. If West Basin is selected for an award, an official resolution must be provided that authorizes the district's commitment to the financial obligations associated with receipt of the financial assistance. Technically, the resolution does not need to be adopted until the district is selected for funding, but staff is just trying to be a little proactive here as the first round of applications for this program are due on October 17th. And we just want to make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row on this. So while the primary action before you today is to forward this item to the full board with the recommendation to adopt the resolution, I did just want to mention that our manager of engineering, Wendell Johnson, who's helping to lead our application efforts, is here today with us in person. Should you have any technical questions about the project that we're considering for submittal. As you may recall, there's a number of technical planning studies related to the improvement and optimization of our recycled water infrastructure that were funded in this fiscal year's technical planning and CIP budget. And during the budget process, the board asked staff to explore all cost-sharing options available to the district in implementing these technical studies. So this USBR grant application is one of the ways that we're seeking to recover some of those costs that were included in the budget. The purpose of this specific grant program is to provide funding to qualified agencies for conducting planning activities that improve water supply and management solutions. There's 3 subcategories within this grant. The first is water strategy grants, second is project design grants, and the third is drought contingency plans. West Basin intends to submit an application for the water strategy grant program, which we believe aligns closely with our technical planning needs. The engineering, water policy, and finance teams have been actively evaluating and working on these USBR grant opportunities, which I would say has included anywhere between 10 to 15 employees to some extent. The collaboration has really been apparent these last couple of months, and I want to thank every person from our team who has participated in this so far. We've also been receiving regular communications about funding opportunities from our federal advocacy team, VSA, who you will be hearing from shortly. VSA is doing a tremendous job of keeping us informed not only about these USBR Water Smart grants, but also grants from other federal agencies. VSA has also joined our staff on multiple occasions to talk about our needs and to see how those needs might be matched up and met with current or future grant programs. I also wanted to mention that thanks to one of our engineers, Alejandra, who is really leading our efforts here, we were able to host a meeting with a grant program representative from the USBR team to discuss the application process and the types of projects that might qualify for funding. The grant opportunity has 2 rounds of funding with an early deadline of October 17th and a later deadline of April 2nd, 2024. It is possible that West Basin could receive funding in both rounds. There's up to a 50% local cost share associated with this grant program. However, as I mentioned earlier, the funding for these technical planning studies were included in our fiscal year 23-24 budget. So we have already, in essence, met that cost share obligation. So with that said, I'll go ahead and read the recommendation. Staff is recommending that the board adopt resolution number 09-23-1197, which is a resolution of the Board of Directors of the West Basin Municipal Water District, authorizing the application for grant funding to the United States Bureau of Reclamation for the FY23 and FY24 Water Smart Planning and Project Design Grant Program. That concludes my report, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any questions directed here? Director Dare, any questions?
No, I do.
Director Williams?
No, thank you.
All right, then, so we move that with the recommendation. I believe it's Director Dare, I should ask.
Move.
All right, so we move that item with the recommendation from the committee. All right, item 6, information calendar, legislative update for August 2023, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. As you mentioned, item 6A is our monthly update for August of 2023. I'm very pleased to have some special guests here for our federal affairs presentation, but I'm going to introduce our staff member and manager of water policy and resources development, Mr. Matt Bay, to introduce them. Matt, take it away.
Thank you, EJ. So yes, we're going to slightly change up the order of our legislative update today by beginning with our federal affairs report. And as EJ said, we're very excited to have with us today our amazing federal affairs team, Van Scoyoc Associates, who is checking in from our nation's capital. Joining us this afternoon is Pete Evich, Jeff Bowman, and Ashley Strobel, who I believe will each be providing a portion of today's federal report. I did want to note that Pete was planning to join us in person for this month's committee meeting, even had all of his flights booked for the original meeting date. However, the change in date unfortunately made that infeasible for him. Even with that, Pete still wanted to make the trip out, but EJ and I agreed that a virtual report was completely okay at this time. So with that said, VSA has expressed an interest in coming out in person soon. So we'll be looking at dates later this year or early next for the VSA team to join us for some in-person meetings with the staff and the board. The legislative update memo begins on page 7 of the agenda packet. In addition, the August federal report was provided as a handout to directors and will also be placed in the chat for members of the public to view. And once again, just want to say thank you to Pete, Jeff, and Ashley for being here. And I will go ahead now and turn it over to your team for the federal update. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. This is Jeff Bowman. I apologize. My camera's not working today, but everything else seems to be working. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. We are working in a very challenging environment right now in Washington, D.C., particularly from a legislative standpoint. We have very slim majorities in the House and Senate. In the House, as of today, there was a member who resigned out of Utah. There's a 221 Republican, 212 Democrat House. That means at any given time, you've got a 3-seat majority in the House of Representatives. It's even tighter in the Senate. You've got 48 Democrats, 49 Republicans, 3 independents that caucus with the Democrats. So you essentially have a 1-seat majority in the Senate. So there's very little to no margin for error on these votes. Let me talk a little bit about the role of the House Freedom Caucus. At any given time, these are the 45 most conservative members of the House. There are 10 or 15 of these members that really stick together. If we recall back in January, it took 15 separate ballots to get a Speaker of the House For those of you interested in trivia, that's not the most ballots it's taken. The most it ever took was in 1856 when it took 2 months and 133 separate ballots. But these 15 separate ballots back in January were unilaterally prompted by the Freedom Caucus. So there were some concessions that were made, but because you only have a 3-seat majority, the Freedom Caucus does have enormous leverage in the House. But just like the United States Constitution, House Republican leadership promised the Freedom Caucus, they were promised opportunities, but they were not promised outcomes. But the Freedom Caucus, they held up the debt limit deal. I'll get to that in a minute. They are right now holding up the FY 2024 appropriations bills and the White House supplemental spending request. The other thing that the Freedom Caucus can do is they 3 of them sit on the House Rules Committee. The House Rules Committee is a 9-4 majority, and that's the committee that determines how to bring the bills to the floor. So not only can there are 3 members of the Freedom Caucus who are on the Rules Committee. So not only can the Freedom Caucus completely take down a bill on the House floor, that by their very construct, they can actually stop legislation from coming to the House floor at the Rules Committee. So again, challenging environment. The other thing we're tracking, there's been some retirements, some announced retirements. Obviously we're gonna lose Senator Feinstein after 2024. It's gonna be a big loss for us. Also, Grace Napolitano leaving. Some other things that are somewhat impactful. Tom Carper is retiring. He's the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee. He was very helpful in getting the Harbor South Bay authorization in 2018. We also got a couple of term limited chairs. On the House side, there's 6 years of being chair or ranking are coming up. One is Kay Granger from Texas. She's the Appropriations Committee chair. The other, Sam Graves at the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, another one who was helpful in the Harbor South Bay project in the past. On the debt limit piece, this is what, avoiding disaster is what counts as a victory in Washington, D.C. these days. So the debt limit essentially is the total amount of money that the United States government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations, including Social Security, Medicare, military salaries, interest on the national debt, tax refunds, other payments. It was temporarily suspended in June. It'll be suspended until January 2025. This is actually the 78th time since 1960 the debt limit has been suspended. The current debt limit is right now estimated to be approximately 31.5 trillion. And when the debt limit will then be set at whatever level it is reached when the suspension ends. Again, this is what accounts for a success story these days, just delaying a disaster. The deal will likely impact some of the programs that we chase after. Pete will get into more details on that, but you're looking at caps on discretionary spending over the next 2 years. You're probably going to see very small increases in budgets, if any increases at all, over the next several years. So we're entering into a very constrained funding environment. If you look at the House bills that were passed out of the Appropriations Committee earlier this year, they were marked well below the FY 2023 levels, closer to the 2022 levels. I think biggest concern is if the appropriations bills are not enacted this year, the debt limit deal calls for a 1% across the board cut to all discretionary spending. That includes everything that we work on for you guys, as well as the Department of Defense. So kind of looking forward, we've got another 15 days until the end of the fiscal year in Washington, D.C. So you've got a couple of must-do things. You've got to figure out a way to either enact the FY 2024 appropriations bills or enact a continuing resolution that acts as a bridge to get us into 2024. The House is looking to maybe do a CR into November, the Senate into December. The Senate's trying to move their bills. They've pulled up a couple of bills this week. The House tried to move the defense bill last week. That should be an easy one, but they didn't have the votes to bring it to the floor. So it's kind of chaotic right now. White House sent over a supplemental spending request of $40 billion. 24 of that billion of that 40 is for defense in Ukraine. There's 12 billion for disaster response and recovery and 4 billion for border security. But this is all hung up right now. The Freedom Caucus really isn't letting anything pass the House. A couple other must-do bills. The federal aviation programs expire at the end of the month. National Flood Insurance Program expires at the end of the month. And at the end of the year, we're going to have to do something before the end of the year, probably have to do something to reauthorize the Farm Bill programs. since those expire also on September. There's enough money to get us through the end of the year on that. And then the National Defense Authorization Act. The conference for that will start the last week of September, but it's unclear when that will wrap up. There's some other bills I think Congress would like to do. I think they'd like to do something on rail safety. I think they'd like to do something on infrastructure permitting reform. I think we're on a good glide path to do another Water Resources Development Act, and then Pete will go more into this, but I think there's still going to be a lot of talk about PFAS, and I think I'd like to do a PFAS bill, see if they can't do something to kind of exempt passive receivers like West Basin from Superfund liability. The most important date we're focused on right now is September the 30th. That's the end of the fiscal year. And kind of looking ahead, the crystal ball, I think there's a 90% chance we're going to head into a partial federal government shutdown starting on October the 1st. The Freedom Caucus has made their demands. It's largely, there's 4 demands that they've made of any spending bill, any final package. It has to revert to non-defense spending levels of FY 2019. That's a huge cut. They're asking that the levels of defense budget return to FY 2022 levels. That's also a sizable cut. The third demand that they have is that any bill has to enhance border security and incorporate restrictions on immigration. And then the fourth is the Freedom Caucus wants to defund any ongoing investigations of the former president with the FBI and the Department of Justice. So there probably is a deal here somewhere to be made with the Senate. They likely will need Democrat support in the House, but I don't think they're going to be able to get to this deal until after a shutdown. Not sure how we get to conference, the funding bills for FY 2024. A shutdown is going to be devastating, particularly to some of the institutions we work with, like the Army Corps of Engineers, like the Bureau of Reclamation, like the EPA. For the Corps of Engineers, they've got ongoing contracts that have money. Those won't shut down, but I think some of the personnel in the districts and divisions may be furloughed. The other thing, we fully expect there to be a motion or several motions to vacate the chair in the House. That is a parliamentary maneuver to ask for the removal of the speaker. It's unclear right now what the Democrats in the House would do on a motion to vacate. In the past, the minority typically tries to work with their known competition other than their unknown competition, but these times are a little bit different. Other than some in the Freedom Caucus, most of the House Republicans support Speaker McCarthy. A lot of the Republicans, rank and file outside of the Freedom Caucus, and some of the Freedom Caucus members they're trying to get a deal sooner rather than later, but they're not making much progress. And then last 2 points, earlier this week, the Speaker did greenlight 3 House committees to start impeachment inquiries. Again, this is not impeachment process. This is just starting the gathering of facts. Unsure where this goes. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete. He can kind of talk about some of the how this is more relevant directly to West Basin, and particularly as I think we're going to start launching into a bit of a constrained funding environment. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. I'll turn it to Pete.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you, directors, for the opportunity to be here. Despite in terms of the kind of crazy dynamics and outlook that Jeff had outlined, and how it's shaped up to be a kind of a gridlock-ridden situation on Capitol Hill. Beneath the surface, there continues to be a high level of activity on federal issues and infrastructure funding directly impacting the water sector and public water systems. So I'm going to aim to run down the primary issues, topics, and funding opportunities coming out of Washington this year, which we believe are of keenest interest to West Basin. However, I'd like to first kick off my remarks with some select highlights of West Basin's advocacy trip this past April, and the groundwork which was laid during the fly-in on priorities that will take further shape as we head into calendar year 2024. We certainly see next year as an important one for West Basin in terms of continued federal agency and congressional engagement activity, as the district looks to pursue and leverage federal infrastructure funding for its high priority initiatives. During the DC advocacy trip, Director Houston and Matt discussed with West Basin's congressional delegation and our federal agency partners the district's recycled water integration strategy and the necessary capital investment that would be tied to this undertaking. In addition to our dialogue with West Basin's entire congressional delegation on this topic, we had a very important engagement with a number of key officials from the Army Corps of Engineers, as West Basin still has the potential to access $30 million in Army Corps funding through its Harbor South Bay project authorization. We discussed the potential to pursue those dollars to advance the district's recycled water integration proposal. The Corps officials we met with were intrigued by the possibility of West Basin applying its federal project authorization funding to build pipeline interconnection from the future Met Pure Water facility to the Juanita Millender McDonald water recycling plant. Such a project could fit well into the Corps' effort to support a greater number of initiatives that would enhance drought resiliency in the West. In fact, last year, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, Mike Connor, issued a memorandum on how the Corps should be doing more to support drought resiliency in America's communities. Then in our meeting with Bureau of Reclamation officials, we conveyed our support in seeing reclamation grant funding to Met's Pure Water recycling facility. We explained how those future grant dollars could directly benefit West Basin should the district build the infrastructure to interconnect with Met's project. We also talked to Reclamation about Colorado River issues and the success of West Basin's water conservation and turf removal initiatives, and in the process thanking Reclamation officials as some of those activities of West Basin's received financial support from the Bureau's Water Smart Grant Program. Lastly, we discussed West Basin's strategic effort in collaboration with a coalition of key area water agencies to expand the region's groundwater infrastructure and the consideration of Reclamation to play a role in this undertaking. As West Basin's recycled water integration program and groundwater infrastructure proposals continue to take shape over the coming years, there are related district priority projects and feasibility study efforts where VSA is helping your team pursue federal funding in the near term. We are currently evaluating 2 Edward Little facility rehabilitation and replacement related projects for potential funding in next year's congressional appropriations earmark process. We are looking at those initiatives more closely to examine which one might be the best fit to bring to West Basin's congressional delegation for EPA earmarked funding consideration. And recently, VSA highlighted for West Basin the announcement of a few key Bureau of Reclamation Water Smart grant funding opportunities surrounding drought resiliency, including dollars to advance projects in the planning and design stages. This set in motion multiple meetings between VSA and West Basin's engineering team to walk through near-term priority projects and planning-related efforts tied to the future expansion of West Basin's recycled water program. As a result of our collaboration discussions, as you took action on earlier on in this committee meeting, West Basin is on track to submit one or multiple grant applications associated with these reclamation funding opportunities. So VSA will continue to work with West Basin staff as these applications are being prepared, including securing letters of support from West Basin's congressional delegation. In addition, West Basin plans to pursue, we believe, another soon-to-be-released reclamation grant application which could help fund additional turf removal efforts. VSA identified another potential opportunity which may help West Basin secure federal funding. Earlier this month, FEMA announced its initial designation of 483 census tracts nationwide, which are called Community Disaster Resilience Zones. These areas will be eligible for increased federal support for efforts that will enhance resiliency to natural hazards and extreme weather. After reviewing FEMA's census tract map, VSA notified West Basin that one of the zones falls within the district service area, in fact, within Division 1. The 2022 law, which required FEMA to create these disaster resilience zones, also directs all federal agencies to prioritize these areas and offer more generous federal grant cost shares for projects that fall within the designated zones. FEMA will be announcing additional zone designation areas over the next year to 18 months. The resiliency zones are developed using what's called the National Risk Index and cross-referencing it with the White House's recently created Climate and Justice Screening Tool. VSA is gathering more information on this development, and we will be working closely with West Basin staff to identify potential future projects tied to this tract within your service area, which may be prioritized for federal funding. Also out of FEMA, we call to West Basin's attention the agency's announcement that it is making $380 million available in grant funding to assist localities in combating cyber threats. Importantly, as part of the announcement, it was noted that special districts like West Basin are eligible grant recipients. This FEMA cyber threat grant funding will be first routed through a state agency, and in California, that will be Cal OES. VSA is currently working with West Basin to identify the appropriate contacts at Cal OES as the district explores the possibility of securing grant funding through this new program. The issue of water affordability has been a priority of Senator Padilla's, and he made that the topic focus of the first hearing he held at the end of May in his role as chairman of the Senate Environment and Public Works Subcommittee on Water and Wildlife. As part of his efforts in this area, Senator Padilla is expected to introduce legislation to make permanent a federal low-income household water assistance program. Future legislation would likely build upon the low-income household water assistance program, which Congress funded at $1.1 billion in 2020 and 2021 to assist low-income households burdened by the economic consequences of the COVID pandemic. Unfortunately, however, those particular dollars have been or will soon be fully expended. So we'll be sure to alert West Basin once the senator decides to introduce this water affordability legislation. In June, Senator Feinstein reintroduced her STREAM Act legislation, which would reauthorize several important Bureau of Reclamation Western Water Grant programs, which were first established in 2016. The measure would reauthorize the Title 16 competitive grant program for water recycling and reuse projects at $60 million a year over a 5-year period. It would also reauthorize Reclamation's desalination and water storage grant programs, among others. As West Basin did in the last Congress, the district has again formally endorsed the STREAM Act. West Basin's support of the legislation was noted in Senator Feinstein's press release, which listed out all the supporting agencies. Unfortunately, this measure faces an uphill struggle for enactment in this Congress, as California Republicans in the House have prioritized related legislation, which includes loosening of environmental laws in order to provide operational flexibility of Bay Delta water. Those provisions are opposed by the environmental community, which make it unlikely to be able to advance in the Senate. On the federal regulatory side, Jeff made mention of this issue. Of most interest, we believe, to most public water agencies, including West Basin, has been EPA's activity and proposed regulations to address PFAS contamination in the water system. In August of last year, EPA issued a draft rule to designate two of the most prevalent PFAS chemicals, PFOA and PFOS, as hazardous substances under CERCLA. CERCLA is more commonly known as the Superfund law. The proposed PFAS CERCLA designation is extremely concerning to water, wastewater, and recycling system operators. Even though the Superfund law was written with the intent to hold the polluters liable for cleanup, the law does not include an exemption for so-called passive receivers of harmful chemicals. As such, entities like West Basin, which are downstream recipients of wastewater flows that may contain PFAS, could be liable under CERCLA, meaning that even though water and wastewater system operators had nothing to do with creating the PFAS pollution, they could still face legal action and increased cleanup costs. EPA's stated position that the agency will exercise enforcement discretion in applying the law has not allayed the concerns of the larger community of water operators who are turning to Congress to enact a legislative exemption to shield passive receivers of PFAS. For its part, West Basin has officially endorsed legislation introduced this past May by Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming. The Lummis bill would explicitly shield water operators from CERCLA liability and the cost for cleanup at sites where a water system disposed of treatment residuals that contain PFAS. In addition, West Basin wrote a letter to Senators Padilla and Feinstein this summer requesting their support for PFAS liability protections under CERCLA for water, wastewater, and recycling water systems. And Jeff alluded to this, that the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee announced its intention to mark up PFAS-related legislation before the August congressional recess period. That effort has been stalled over this exact issue related to CERCLA relief to passive receivers. The contention stems from the opposition of influential environmental groups to the idea of amending CERCLA to provide any exemptions under the law. VSA has had multiple communications with West Basin staff on this issue, and earlier in the year conducted meetings with district personnel to understand the potential impacts of this proposed EPA regulation on West Basin. VSA will continue to monitor this issue closely and support West Basin's advocacy efforts seeking a congressional amendment to the law. And lastly, as each of you know, it has been an active year associated with Colorado River water levels and releases. The heavy rains of the winter and early spring provided a temporary reprieve. As such, 1 month ago, Reclamation announced it will revert to a Tier 1 water storage for 2024, which means that California will not be required to give up any of its water. Reclamation is currently negotiating deals with Colorado River users, which would require reductions in water use over the next 3 years in exchange for federal drought-related funding, which was provided through the Inflation Reduction Act. The Bureau is expected to announce funding awards for these projects, which are estimated to amount to roughly $1.2 billion at the end of this year. Reclamation has also begun preparing a new long-term operating plan for the basin states, which will govern the river's releases beginning in 2027. So despite the kind of the gloomy outlook in the high level perspective that Jeff provided, that we're going to see some legislative gridlock and partisan rancor, kind of continuing to grip the 118th Congress. Clearly, activity in Washington surrounding water policy issues, regulations, and federal infrastructure funding opportunities, as well as other topics of importance and impact to West Basin, has clearly been high. We certainly expect this will continue to be the case in the months ahead. And we also look forward to planning our advocacy priorities, engagements with you as we begin to eye the 2024 calendar year. While we've covered a number of the key issues in our presentation, Jeff, Ashley, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have on the topics we discussed or anything else of importance or interest to the directors and General Manager Caldwell. And so with that, our remarks are concluded. So thank you so much.
First, hi, this is Chair Gray. I wanted to thank Jeff and Pete and Ashley for the reports this month, for being here to do the reports. I do have a question, but before I do that, let me ask Director Deere, do you have any questions? Director Deere? Director Williams?
No, thank you.
Okay, regarding the pending or discussion about legislation in regards to water affordability that Senator Padilla is looking at, can you explain a little bit more about that? If you could give us a little more details about that piece of
Yeah.
legislation, or he's creating it?
Yes. So, there for years there's been they call it the LIHEAP program, the low energy energy assistance for low income households. And then prior to that, for years there was somewhat of a movement to provide a permanent federal grant program or stream nationwide that would assist low income households related to water and wastewater utility bills. Then, with the pandemic hitting, there were a couple of those big COVID relief packages, and in two of those packages, one had I think it was $500 million, and then the second one had $600 million to start up through the Department of Health and Human Services, this low-income household assistance grant program. But it was really just temporary. It was for related, to the dire economic situation pertaining to, as it related to the pandemic. Those funds are now, from my understanding, expended and or about to be fully expended. But there's now an effort. We want the momentum to keep that up. There's still a need for such a program, and so Senator Padilla feels that he would like to see a program that's permanent. There was a pilot program in the bipartisan infrastructure package, but he's working on legislation kind of specifically in that regard. There may be some other provisions as well, but I know that Director Gray, that would be the kind of the centerpiece of what he's looking at.
And
Hopefully
this is
that helps.
Thank you. And this to make the program permanent, is that what you're saying, basically?
Correct. They'd like to make authorize a permanent program. And now, he's on he would be on the Senate authorizing committee to do that. Of course, the Senate is Democrat controlled, the House is Republican controlled. So in this, as Jeff had talked about, the budget, there's new budgetary concerns and constraints. So the idea of adding there's a headwind here with adding a new federal program, in light of now newly concerns about deficit spending and the like. So, but that notwithstanding, I think, he still plans to try to authorize a permanent program or at least get the momentum going for that. If it does get authorized, it would still need annual appropriations dollars, but yeah, that would be the effort, Director Gray, a permanent program.
Thank you. Do you know, and maybe EJ can answer this at some point, if that program is any of our residents in our district were impacted or would be affected by or could benefit from that program? So I guess that's a question to EJ for later. But I want to thank all of you. I'm sorry that I'm not there, and I know you guys are not there either. But I do look forward to seeing everyone in person for our trip. So, but thank you for being on Zoom this afternoon, and appreciate the report from all of you, and look forward to seeing you all. Yeah, unless there's any questions for Director Williams or Director Deere?
No. No, thank you.
If not, thank you very much. If not, we can move on, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Yes. And by the way, we look forward to seeing you again in person, and hopefully that will be either later this year when we come out there, and then also, as you mentioned, the DC advocacy trip next year. We on behalf of Jeff and Ashley and the VSA team, we want to just lastly thank you again for this opportunity to present to you today, and good to see both Directors Deere and Directors Williams as well, and hopefully we'll get to see the both of you as well too when we're out there. So
yeah,
thank you.
And let me Yeah, and thank your agency for the great work that you do, that all of you do on behalf of West Basin. So thank you very much for your outstanding service. So thank you.
Thank you. We're honored. We're honored to be in the position to do this. So thank you.
Great. Okay, EJ?
Yes, a quick thank you to VSA. Thank you for taking your time to be with us here today. I'm going to throw it back over to Matt. We do have somewhat of a brief state legislative update because we're going to have another presentation for you from our state lobbyists at our board meeting towards the end of the month, but I'll hand it over to Matt right now.
Thank you, Jay. And thanks, Pete, Jeff, and Ashley. Just echo everything they said. We'll talk to you soon. So printed copies of the monthly state legislative reports, along with the state bill tracking report, were provided as handouts to the directors with digital copies of all these materials being made available in the chat. And yeah, just to ditto what EJ said, that our state advocacy team, Niemela Pappas and Associates, will provide a full legislative summary at the board of directors meeting on September 25th. So Emily Pappas and Jamie Miner will provide an overview of the first year of the 2-year legislative session that just concluded, and will let us know what's kind of coming up for us in 2024. So as I mentioned, the 2023 legislative session has officially concluded, and a full report will be made on the 25th. In the meantime, I just wanted to provide a few updates on some of the priority issues and bills we've been tracking. First, as you've likely heard, and I think we mentioned yesterday at the PI committee, AB 1572 has passed the legislature and now awaits its fate on the desk of the governor. This is the bill that would prohibit potable water irrigation at non-functional turf properties in the commercial, industrial, and institutional sector. This bill would be phased in over the next 4 to 6 years with potentially a longer compliance timeline for disadvantaged communities. And just as a reminder, West Basin's board did take a support position on this bill, which was also co-sponsored by the Metropolitan Water District. Over the past 6 months, we've been very engaged on this issue with our partners, including Metropolitan, Aqua, and others. We've participated in work groups and on various legislative committees where the bill has been discussed and recommendations for amendments have been made. The bill was significantly amended since it was introduced, and today, most, if not all, of the opposition from the bill has been removed. One of the biggest remaining concerns had been the inclusion of multifamily residential in the bill for affordability kind of concerns, but those provisions were removed in the most recent amendment to the satisfaction of local water agencies and municipalities. So if this does get signed by the governor, West Basin will be actively exploring outreach and education opportunities in our communities, and we'll also be seeking funding opportunities to support our retailers and the CII communities to help them in replacing non-functional turf with climate-appropriate landscapes. A companion bill to AB 1572, which was AB 1573, also authored by Assembly Member Laura Friedman, was held up in appropriations and added to the inactive file, so it's dead for this year. It would have implemented California's first requirement for the inclusion of low water native plants in public and commercial landscapes, and also contained a prohibition for non-functional turf in these spaces. I don't think this is the last we'll see of this proposed legislation. It's very likely that we'll see something come back next year. The other major thing just to mention is regarding the proposed climate bond. It's all but confirmed that any bond with water-related provisions would not go to voters for approval until the November 2024 general election. So with that time frame in mind, the legislature has until early next summer to pass a bill that would send the water bond to the ballot. This is another area where we've been very much engaged. And just last month, we were able to secure a win by having updated language included in the final version of a letter that Water Reeves sent to the legislature about the bond. The language that we asked to be included requests funding for treatment system and technology enhancements that optimize and maintain reliability of existing recycled water production infrastructure. This is somewhat of a departure from past practice, which has focused on funding for new projects or new water, but we're really hopeful that this will get some traction. EJ, our general manager, has already discussed the concept also with Senator Ben Allen's staff. Senator Allen is the author of one of the climate bills, and so we are planning additional follow-up with the author's office to solidify our ask for this language in the final version of the climate bond. I should also note that NPA is working behind the scenes to ask for increased funding for recycled water projects in general for the bond, and is also supporting our more specific language requests as needed. I know that NPA is likely going to talk about a couple of constitutional amendments that will be likely going to voters next year related to bond voter thresholds. So I won't go into the details at this time, but you will receive an update on that on the 25th. Another bill, AB 1216, this is by Assembly Member Mertsucci from our delegation. That impacts one part of our service area in the city of El Segundo. This legislation would require air monitoring equipment to be installed around the Hyperion plant. City of El Segundo was very active in pushing support for this legislation, and that bill has now passed both houses and is on the governor's desk for final action. The final bill I'll mention is SB 389. This was a water rights bill that's authored also by Senator Ben Allen. This bill would authorize the State Water Board to investigate and determine whether or not certain water rights are valid. It would allow the board to issue an informational order as part of an investigation and to seek the prohibition of certain unauthorized diversion of water. As we reported before, the water industry came out in full force against a package of water rights bills that were introduced earlier this year, with most of them being killed or turned into two-year bills. However, SB 389 was somewhat less concerning to the water industry, who worked with the author to amend the bill several times and get it to a point where it was a little more palatable and allow them to remove some of their opposition. That said, there continues to be a decent-sized list of opposition as well as support for the bill, so it will be interesting to see if this bill gets signed by the governor. Finally, we've reported before that the state expects to hold a public hearing on October 4th regarding the proposed statewide water use objective regulations, with written comments being due by October 17th. The water industry is pretty fired up right now, and we'll be letting the board know on October 4th that there continues to be lots of issues with the draft regulations that require more time and consideration. It's definitely something that we, again, are engaged on, especially with aqua and water reuse. Our staff has been attending 3 to 4 kind of work group meetings each week for the past couple of weeks on this issue. We also plan to host an informational webinar for our retailers in the next month, where we hope to understand what their needs are for how we can support them in meeting the new regulations. I will definitely continue to keep this committee informed on the status of this issue as it moves forward. And yeah, as I said, NPA will provide a fuller report on the 25th, so something to look forward to. That does conclude my report. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, so much. Are there any questions? Director Deere,
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Director Williams.
No, thank you. Good report.
All right, thanks. Great report. Thank you so much. EJ, is there any, I think that's the last item. And the next, is it closed session next? On the agenda?
Madam Chair, we have one more information item. It is our monthly Metropolitan Water District programs update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst 2.
Thank you, Jay. Good afternoon, Chair Gray and board directors. So this report summarizes recent activities of Metropolitan Water District that include the ad valorem property taxes, the report on assessed valuation, state and federal legislative highlights that Metropolitan is tracking, their cyclic cost offset program, imported water financial transaction, future board items, and then we'll conclude with a look at the water supply conditions. So included with this memo are presentation slides, which begin on page 28 of the committee packet. So first, if we can go to that slide, the first slide talks about the ad valorem taxes. So in August, Metropolitan adopted a resolution to levy the property taxes for fiscal year 23-24. And this will maintain the property tax rate of 0.0035%, assessed valuation. And this is the same rate that has been levied since 2012. The graphic showed what the estimated taxes per year would be for a typical single-family home. These ad valorem property taxes are collected from all non-exempt properties within metropolitan service area, and that helps to pay for the debt service on the general obligation bond and to help pay a portion of their state water contract obligations. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So regarding assessed valuation, Metropolitan has received their certified assessed valuation, referred to this as AB, from 6 county auditors within their service area. So as you are aware, this is part of the Metropolitan Act, and Metropolitan uses this information to base their weighted voting system. So based on that information received, the certified assessed valuation for Metropolitan's area totaled $3.86 trillion for fiscal year 23-24. The number of director representation for each member agency, they do remain the same. And this table shows a comparison of West Basin's AB information for this year compared to last year. It has increased by 6.3%. And even though the AB has increased, the total vote entitlement has slightly decreased. This is shown as a decrease of 0.01%. And this is because the percentage of vote entitlement for West Basin is calculated as a percentage of Metropolitan's entire total. So even though West Basin's, we did not grow as fast as some of the other member agencies. So again, while West Basin has a higher voter entitlement, the voter entitlement makes up a slightly smaller percentage of the overall entitlement of Metropolitan. Next slide, please. So this shows the AB information for all of the member agencies, their percent of total and vote entitlement. And also included in this report under attachment A is a comparison for all member agencies. That's also included in this packet as well. If we can go to the next slide, please. So state legislative highlights. These are just key items that Metropolitan is working on. The budget and bond priorities in the legislature. Metropolitan has been working to advance their budget request for $50 million from the state budget. And this would be to support projects that are being developed in order to move additional water resources to their state water project dependent areas. And if awarded, the funding would come from further Traylorville activity or through the climate bond proposals. And then regarding the climate bond funding, Metropolitan is requesting funding to be included to address additional money for the recycled water projects, dam safety, regional conveyance, and urban conservation. The state legislative bills of interest to Metropolitan. So there is a brief summary of each of these bills that are listed in the report. And of key interest to West Basin is AB 1572, introduced by Laura Friedman and co-sponsored by Metropolitan, of which you heard about earlier, that Matt Bay had provided a good summary on. If we can go to the next slide, please. So regarding the federal legislative highlights, Metropolitan staff provided a report at their meeting last month, and in July, 2 brand new bills were introduced. One was the Voluntary Agricultural Land Repurposing Act. This was introduced in response to several water supply shortages in the West. And the other is a Colorado River Salinity Control Act. This was introduced by senators from 5 of the Colorado River Basin states. We can go to the next slide, please. What Metropolitan acted upon were amendments to the cyclic cost offset program. And the board approved amendments to this program. This allows member agencies to purchase water, and it helps relieve a financial burden for member agencies. So when Metropolitan has a water supply surplus, they're able to offer a pre-delivery of imported water, and this is primarily used for the groundwater replenishment. And so they made some modification to the program. This program was established a few years ago, and since then, they reviewed some modifications that could help member agencies, implement this program further. So the amendments included increase the credit amount. They increased the time allowed to purchase water out of the cyclic account. They modified the loss credit, and they made changes to the initiation and reporting process. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this is a graphic that shows Metropolitan's imported water financial transactions, and it shows the cumulative water transactions for water delivered, which is a total of 1.3 thousand acre feet. The water transactions were, as represented in this chart, they were 204,000 acre feet lower than the budget of 1.5. We can go to the next slide, please. This is a look ahead on the board agenda, and highlighted here are a few key discussion items that took place this month. And round 3 of the Future Supply Action Funding Program, a summary of this program will be included in next month's report for the West Basin Board. This item was presented as an information item this month in September. It will be brought back again to the Metropolitan Board in October for their consideration to authorize implementing another program, round 3, for funding later this fall. The other item is a draft 2023 long-range financial plan needs assessment. This item will also be discussed at the next subcommittee on the long-term regional planning process and business modeling. And I'll provide that meeting date. It will be Tuesday, September 26th at 1:30. So they're starting to introduce this discussion, and they will continue having these discussions every month with the board. And I can provide more information to you next month as a result of that as well. The discussion on the Pure Water Program, this information was also recently shared at our caucus meeting last week. And then also included in this report are attachments which provide more information on Metropolitan Board action items. And then lastly, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. For the water supply update. On the left side for the State Water Project resources, Lake Oroville Reservoir is at 82% capacity. So DWR Water Operations Division has been working to prepare for flood control protection and to retain additional space for increased runoff. Also, DWR's water operation, their division monitors forecasts closely to predict incoming storm impacts to determine whether to release water through the spillway in preparation for higher inflows. And for the Colorado River Basin, on the other side of the page, it shows Lake Powell to be 37% of capacity, and Lake Mead is at 34% of capacity. Lake Mead's elevation is 1,064 feet. In the middle of the chart are those gray boxes that indicate the levels of Metropolitan's local storage reservoirs. All of them have more supply of water compared to last year. Diamond Valley Lake served for emergency supply, and the reservoir currently has 650,000 acre feet. Metropolitan continues filling Diamond Valley Lake, and it will be full or nearly full by the end of this year. So Metropolitan's estimate for the dry year storage is estimated to be 3.4 million acre feet. This would be a record storage level, and it would be more than 200,000 acre feet compared to the prior record, and that prior record was set back in 2019. So that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you so much. Are there any questions, Director Deere or Director Williams?
No, thank
So
you.
thank you. Good report.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy. Great report. EJ, what's next, please?
Madam Chair, that concludes our information item, or information counter. Staff has no closed session items today, which brings us to number 8, director's comments and future agenda items.
Any director's comments? Director Deere?
I just have a question of staff. Have there been any changes in the committee meetings in the last couple of days? Calendar.
Not for September. Not yet. We're
Thank
good for the rest of September. The next meeting would be engineering operations, next Wednesday, the 20th.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's all, Director Green.
Thank you, Director Deere. Director Williams?
No, thank you.
All right. Well, let me say thank you to staff for all the reports this morning and to our guests also. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, and to the public. Bye-bye.
Ben. Man, no, I can write